Imagine two men. They're the same age. They have the same genetics, the same lifestyle, and they both notice the first signs of male pattern baldness at almost exactly the same time. As the months pass, each begins searching for a solution, and before long they arrive at the same crossroads, a decision that millions of people face every year. One chooses Minoxidil. The other chooses Finasteride. 12 months later, both have more hair than they did when they started. But here's the strange part. When doctors examine their scalps, they realize the two medications achieved those results in completely different ways. One helped the hair grow. The other helped prevent it from disappearing in the first place. So which treatment actually worked better? It's one of the biggest debates in hair loss treatment. Search online and you'll find passionate opinions everywhere. Some people swear that Minoxidil transformed their hair. Others insist that Finasteride is the only treatment that truly matters. And then there are those who argue that taking both is the only strategy worth considering. The problem is that most of these conversations begin with the wrong question. People ask, which one is better? But before you can answer that, you first have to understand something much more important. What exactly is each treatment designed to do? Because comparing Minoxidil and Finasteride without understanding how they work is a little like comparing a seatbelt to an airbag. Both improve safety, but they solve different problems. Declaring one better, without understanding its purpose, completely misses the point. To understand why, we first need to go back to the beginning. Not to the medications themselves, but to the real cause of the most common form of hair loss. Male pattern baldness, known medically as androgenetic alopecia, affects millions of people around the world. Despite the name, it isn't caused by shampoo, wearing hats, or washing your hair too often. Those are myths that have survived for decades. The real cause lies much deeper, inside your genetics and the way your hair follicles respond to a hormone called DHT, short for dihydrotestosterone. Here's where things become interesting. DHT isn't a bad hormone. In fact, it's an important hormone that plays a role in male development and several normal biological functions. The problem isn't DHT itself. The problem is that some people's hair follicles are genetically programmed to be unusually sensitive to it. Imagine two people standing in the same sunlight. One enjoys a warm afternoon. The other gets sunburned within minutes. The sunlight isn't different. Their bodies simply respond differently. Hair follicles behave in much the same way. For someone with androgenetic alopecia, DHT gradually causes certain follicles to become smaller with every new hair cycle. This process is called miniaturization. At first, the changes are almost impossible to notice. Each new hair becomes just a little thinner than the last. Then it grows for a shorter period. Eventually, what was once a thick, healthy strand becomes a tiny, almost invisible hair. If the process continues long enough, the follicle may stop producing visible hair altogether. Now imagine trying to solve that problem. Would you focus on growing stronger hair? Or would you try to stop the damage from happening in the first place? That single question explains why Minoxidil and Finasteride are so different, and why the answer to which one works better is far more complicated than most people expect. Now that we understand the real enemy, the next question becomes much easier to answer. How do these two treatments fight back? Although Minoxidil and Finasteride are often mentioned in the same conversation, they couldn't be more different. They don't target the same process, they don't work in the same way, and they don't even begin their journey at the same point. That's why comparing them as if they were competing products is often misleading. They're playing completely different roles. Let's begin with Minoxidil. If you've watched our previous videos, you already know that Minoxidil doesn't remove DHT or change your genetics. Instead, it helps create a healthier environment for hair follicles that are still alive. Scientists are still investigating every detail of how it works, but decades of research have shown that it increases blood flow around the follicle, helps hairs remain in the active growth phase for longer, and can enlarge miniaturized follicles so they produce thicker, stronger hairs. Think of a struggling plant. The plant isn't dying because it lacks water alone, but watering it still gives it a better chance to survive and grow. That's essentially what Minoxidil does. It supports the follicle, encouraging it to perform better despite the challenges it's facing. But here's the important limitation. The reason the follicle began struggling in the first place is still there. DHT continues interacting with genetically sensitive follicles every single day. Minoxidil helps the follicle fight back, but it doesn't remove the source of the pressure. That's why many people see improvement, yet still experience gradual hair loss over the years if nothing addresses the underlying hormonal process. Now let's look at Finasteride. Instead of helping the follicle directly, Finasteride focuses on the cause of the damage. Inside the body, an enzyme called 5-alpha reductase converts testosterone into DHT. Finasteride partially blocks this enzyme, reducing the amount of DHT circulating in the scalp. With lower DHT levels, genetically sensitive follicles are exposed to much less of the signal that causes them to shrink over time. Imagine a factory that's slowly filling with smoke. Minoxidil is like installing powerful ventilation systems that help the workers keep doing their jobs despite the poor conditions. Finasteride, on the other hand, is like finding the machine producing the smoke and switching it off. Both improve the factory, but they solve different problems. This difference explains why dermatologists often consider Finasteride the treatment that targets the underlying mechanism of male pattern baldness. By reducing DHT, it slows or even stops the miniaturization process in many men, helping preserve hair that would otherwise continue becoming thinner with every growth cycle. Does that automatically make Finasteride the better treatment? Not necessarily, because stopping future damage and encouraging stronger growth are two separate goals. Someone whose follicles have already become weak may still benefit from the extra stimulation that minoxidil provides. At the same time, someone who only uses minoxidil without reducing DHT may find themselves constantly fighting against the same biological process that caused the problem in the first place. And this is exactly why the debate becomes so confusing online. People compare two treatments that were never designed to do the same job. It's like asking whether brakes are more important than a steering wheel. The question sounds reasonable until you realize that driving safely depends on both systems working together. So if minoxidil helps hair grow, and Finasteride helps protect it from further damage, what happens when researchers compare them head-to-head, and what do the clinical studies actually reveal? So far, we've seen that minoxidil and Finasteride approach hair loss from two completely different directions. One helps struggling follicles perform better, while the other reduces the hormonal signal responsible for gradually damaging those follicles in the first place. But when scientists compare these treatments in clinical studies, what do they actually find? The answer is one of the biggest reasons this debate has lasted for decades. If the goal is simply to slow or stop the progression of male pattern baldness, Finasteride generally has the advantage. Because it targets DHT, it addresses the biological process driving androgenetic alopecia. In long-term clinical studies, many men who take Finasteride experience either a noticeable slowing of hair loss or stabilization of their condition. In other words, the medication often helps people keep the hair they already have. But that's only half the story. Keeping hair and regrowing hair are not exactly the same thing. Imagine discovering a small leak in your roof. Fixing the leak prevents further damage, but it doesn't automatically repair the water stains already covering the ceiling. You still need to restore what has been affected. Hair loss works in a surprisingly similar way. Finasteride can reduce the damage caused by DHT, but follicles that have already become weakened may still need additional support before they begin producing thicker hairs again. That's one reason many dermatologists combine Finasteride with minoxidil instead of viewing them as competing treatments. Minoxidil acts like the restoration crew. Finasteride acts like the person who stopped the leak. Neither replaces the other. Together, they solve different parts of the same problem. This explains why combination therapy consistently appears in treatment guidelines and clinical practice. By reducing DHT while simultaneously encouraging healthier hair growth, the two medications often produce better overall results than either treatment alone. They're not competing for the same job, they're cooperating toward the same goal. Of course, that raises another important question. If using both sounds so effective, why doesn't everyone simply do it? The answer lies in something that often gets far more attention than the treatments themselves. Side effects. Whenever Finasteride is discussed, concerns about side effects quickly become part of the conversation. Some men report sexual side effects such as reduced libido or erectile dysfunction, while others experience no noticeable problems at all. Clinical studies generally show that these side effects occur in a minority of users, but because they involve an important part of people's lives, they naturally receive a great deal of attention online. Minoxidil has a different safety profile. Since the topical form is applied directly to the scalp, its most common side effects are usually local, including irritation, itching, dryness, or flaking. Serious side effects are uncommon when used correctly, although every medication should be used according to medical advice and the manufacturer's instructions. This is where the internet often creates unnecessary confusion. People tend to judge treatments using dramatic personal stories instead of looking at the overall body of scientific evidence. One person may have an excellent experience. Another may have a negative one. Both experiences are real, but neither represents what will happen to everyone else. That's why decisions about treatment should always be based on evidence, individual circumstances, and discussions with a qualified healthcare professional, not on a single comment found online. So, let's return to the question we asked at the very beginning. Which one actually works better? The most accurate answer is that it depends on what you're asking the treatment to do. If your goal is to address the hormonal process responsible for male pattern baldness, Finasteride generally has the stronger scientific evidence because it targets DHT itself. If your goal is to stimulate healthier growth from follicles that are still alive, Minoxidil has decades of evidence supporting its effectiveness. But if your goal is to achieve the best possible long-term outcome, the conversation changes completely. The question is no longer, which one is better? It's, how do these treatments work together? And that's perhaps the biggest lesson of all. People often spend months arguing about whether Minoxidil or Finasteride is the better treatment, when in reality they're asking the wrong question. It's like arguing whether the foundation or the walls are more important when building a house. A strong home doesn't exist because one part is better than the other. It exists because every part performs the job it was designed to do. Hair loss treatment follows the same principle. Understanding the role of each treatment is far more valuable than trying to crown a single winner. Because every answer leads to another question. And in the next episode of HairLab Explained, we'll explore one of the biggest mysteries in hair science. What exactly is DHT, and why does this completely normal hormone attack hair follicles in some people, but not in others? The answer begins inside your genes, and it may completely change the way you think about hair loss.